Good afternoon, good morning, good day. Welcome to Hummingbird Hour, the special edition for this month in honor of our second anniversary as a company. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to Hummingbird Hour. I'm not used to being Brian, so this is a little weird, but super excited. I'm going to go ahead and just spotlight um, myself so that people can see clearly. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Hummingbird Hour. We are so excited to welcome you to our community for this event. We are still having people coming in, so I want to make sure that we can let people into the room. And so just give everyone a couple minutes to get into the room before we officially get started with today's event. Thank you all for being here. We know that time is of the essence, and we appreciate you spending some of that time with us. Super excited to have everyone here. Welcome. If this is your first time attending a Hummingbird Hour, welcome. Thank you for being here. Super excited to welcome everyone into the space. I'm just going to give another 2 minutes to let people into the room. We're having a good turnout so far. Super exciting. So welcome everyone. My name is Mark Travis Rivera. I use he, him pronouns. I am a communications consultant with Hummingbird Humanity and a professional storyteller. And I am today's moderator for Hummingbird Hour. So welcome everyone. If you are new to the space, I'm just really excited to have you here. And we're gonna go through kind of our opening remarks, and then we are going to pause for a moment of silence and go get started with the conversation. So thank you all for being here. In honor of our second anniversary, Hummingbird Humanity is launching this special edition of Hummingbird Hour, our monthly conversation series that brings thought leaders, DEI professionals, creatives, and people leaders throughout the world and the country to talk about important issues that foster humanization in the workplace, creating human-centered workplace culture, which is the mission of Hummingbird Humanity, to amplify the voices of the unheard and to develop workplaces where all people can thrive, feel a sense of belonging, and feel safe. Our founder, Brian McCormack, is not just our founder and our CEO, but he is a person who understands positionality and privilege, and he wanted to make space for the team members at Hummingbird Humanity who identify as transgender, non-binary, and gender non-conforming to have an event, a space, a conversation. And he gave us the resources and the space to join us today with two special guests. I'm super honored to be a part of this event today. You know, in our commitment to amplify the voices of the unheard, in light of the recent anti-LGBTQ legislation and attacks against the trans and queer community, we wanted to create a space to not only just talk about supporting the LGBT community in the workplace, but also show representation of successful transgender, non-binary, and gender non-conforming people so that others can see what is possible in a just and equitable workplace. But as we gather here today, as we acknowledge the need for celebration and awareness, I also want to acknowledge the recent white supremacist attack in Buffalo, New York. Some of the victims' families are at funerals today. And so in recognition of that moment, of the 10 people who lost their lives, 10 Black people who lost their lives, and to the victims of the recent anti-Asian hate crime spike, and to the trans people of color, especially trans women of color, who are being killed at disproportionate rates. We stand with you. We stand in solidarity with you. We see you. We hear you. Hummingbird Humanity is here for you. So let's please take a moment of silence to recognize the recent victims in Buffalo and all of those who have been victims of hate crimes and attacks for who they are. Thank you. We are excited that Hummingbird Humanity is growing fast and growing quickly. So please feel free to mention in the chat where you are attending from today's event. And if you want to connect with the community, feel free to drop your LinkedIn or social media links in the chat. We have enabled live captions for those who are deaf or hard of hearing or prefer to use captions. Click the caption button in the Zoom toolbar. Sorry, I just enabled it. I apologize, I didn't enable it. So feel free to go ahead and click the caption button to get the captions, okay? As you can see, we have a slideshow, so we're gonna quickly go through some slide decks before we start the conversation. Welcome again. So next slide, please. We're celebrating 2 years, which is why we're here. Welcome to the celebration. May is Mental Health Awareness Month. And so it's really important that you take care of yourself, your mind, body, and spirit. Next. May is also Jewish American Heritage Month, and so we want to acknowledge the Jewish community in America. May is also Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month. So even more important to amplify the need to stop Asian hate. Next month, Hummingbird Hour will resume its monthly cadence with Rose Perry, a DEI leader, and he's going to be talking about his book, Imagine Belonging in the Workplace, and we're super excited to have him in honor of Pride Month. And our special guest today, I'm super excited to have the opportunity to be in conversation with these two brilliant women. Our first guest, some of you may know her, but I want to do a formal introduction. Peppermint is a trailblazing actress, singer, DJ, reality star, and activist who defies limitations. A longtime key figure in queer nightlife, Peppermint star rose thanks to her smashing success as the first out trans contestant on RuPaul's Drag Race, where she finished as a runner-up in one of the series' most talked about finales. Soon after, her talent led her to become the first trans woman to originate a principal role on Broadway in the hit musical Head Over Heels. Recent projects include an appearance on Ryan Murphy's Emmy Award-winning series Pose, a recurring role on the CBS series God Friended Me, and an upcoming role on the new Fox scripted drama Jeopardy. Thank you so much, Pepper, for being here. Our next guest is Celia Sandhya Daniels, who is an Asian Indian trans woman of color who is an entrepreneur, musician, photographer, storyteller, activist, and blogger. She is a management consultant with over 20 plus years of demonstrated success in operating, growing, and spearheading media, healthcare, and life sciences engagements for Fortune 100 companies. Celia brings an amazing intersectional blend of ethnicity, culture, faith, and corporate experience to educate, empower, and advocate for transgender rights in her activism. She's also the founder and CEO of Rebekon Consulting, LLC. And next, I have the distinct privilege of introducing two of my colleagues at Humminbird Humanity. Ben Greene is one of the only two transgender people in his hometown. Ben Greene has always been the designated educator. After giving a successful TEDx talk called Where Are You Sitting?, he began his career as a speaker and LGBTQ plus inclusion consultant. He has spoken all over the world in many different domains, conferences and summits, schools, universities, government, agencies, and internal events for global corporations. He is writing a book for parents. If you can please make sure you're muted. If you're not speaking, that'd be great. He is writing a book for parents and families of transgender youth, and he sits on the advisory board of the Tufts Master's Degrees in Diversity and Inclusion. He is passionate about educating others from a place of compassion, no matter where they're starting from. And next, and finally in our guest panelist discussion, we have JD Valaderes-Williams. I hope I pronounced that second name correctly, JD. JD is a DEI consultant, instructional designer, and activist who helps small to large companies unpack conversations around historically excluded identities and equips them with tools to become agents of change. Previous partnerships include the New York City Department of Education and It Gets Better project, focusing on LGBTQ plus history, activism, and inclusivity in schools. JD has also led workshops for Spain's Ministry of Culture in Madrid, on cultural competency and increased awareness of social issues. JD enjoys cooking, traveling, and writing about their experiences as a queer Latin immigrant growing up in the American suburbs. Thank you all so much for being here. We can go ahead and stop the slideshow. I'm going to go ahead and spotlight my fellow panelists. I am super, I might have just replaced myself, so I'm going to figure out how to add a spotlight. There we go. Thank you for the help, Lindsay. Add spotlight, great. And then I'm going to add myself to the spotlight. Awesome sauce. Hi, y'all. How y'all doing?
Good.
Good.
Wonderful.
That was a mouthful, so I'm going to pause for a second and just give everyone a quick second to say hello and just one quick sentence of how you're feeling today to ground us in this space. We'll start with JD.
Hey y'all, JD here, they pronouns. Just excited to be here with all of these folks.
I can go next.
I'll go.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, Ben. Ben, go, Ben.
Okay.
Oh.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ben. I'm signing in from St. Louis, Missouri, starting off a 4-day streak of rain and thunderstorms here. So feeling a little bit gray on the outside, trying to add some extra color from the inside, and super excited to be here today.
Ben, you are adding color everywhere. I can't help but notice whatever's on the top shelf organized in a rainbow. I want to read those books. Hi, everyone. My name is Peppermint, and I am zooming in from New York City. I just landed from Canada a couple of minutes ago, and I'm excited, a little delirious, but very excited to be here.
Hi, everyone. My name is Celia Sandhya Daniels. I am proud to be here, and I'm so glad that this is a great platform for us as allies, as advocates to amplify the voices of trans, queer, gender non-binary, and intersex community. I'm glad to be a part of this conversation, and also this discussion is so important and meaningful to the audience and also to us. We are always learning, and I'm so glad to be here. Thank you.
Yes. Hi, everyone. I'm zooming in from Atlanta, Georgia. Just moved to the South 6 months ago from California. And before that, I was in New York City. So I guess you can say I'm a city girl. Super excited to be in conversation with the four of you. I have the privilege of knowing two of them really well. And Celia and I have spoken on panels together in the past. And Peppermint, this is my first time meeting you, although I've been a long follower of your work. And so I just want to thank you all for being here today and making space for this conversation. I also want to just note for the audience, this is going to be an informative, empowering conversation, but we're going to hear some difficult truth and some uncomfortable situations that we may have experienced. And so I just want to put out on the onset a content warning that things may elicit strong emotions. And so if you have to step away for a second, feel free to do that for yourselves as we hold space for this important conversation today. This event is also ambitious because we're trying to do this conversation in an hour and then a half-hour non-recorded Q&A with the audience. So I want the audience to know that we are going to do our best to get to all these important topics and talking points, but also acknowledge that we're going to do a 30-minute Q&A with the panelists without it being recorded, so people can feel free to ask their questions without being recorded in the recording, okay? And it's also ambitious that we want to also bring some joy into this conversation. And I think, you know, the weight of being a person of color, a trans or queer person in this country is so heavy. And for those of us who exist at the intersections of all these identities, the weight is compounded. And so in the midst of all the trials and tribulations and challenges and discrimination, it is hard to find the joy. But I know that joy only stems from gratitude. And so I'm grateful to be alive. I'm grateful to be living in my truth. I'm grateful to be in community with all of you. So can you tell us, I'm going to go to Ben first and then work my way around the room. You know, can you tell our audience what being trans, non-binary, and gender conforming means to you? And so obviously I know I'm speaking to all the panelists. And so whatever identity fits you, please tell us, Ben, what does it mean for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So my identity is that I'm a transgender male, spent 16 years as a pretty weird girl, and now I'm a cute and perpetually 14-year-old boy. Um, and I think what that means to me, really, it feels very magical. And I think there is almost something divine about the fact that we as trans and non-binary and gender non-conforming people get to create the way that we exist in the world in a way that a lot of people don't get to do. And that is really cool and feels really powerful to say, like, I am my own sculptor, and every person that I meet is their own sculptor. You know, there's not one, oh, here's the trans person that tells you how to be trans or how to be non-binary. Everyone is so creative in how they choose to build themselves. And that's really beautiful. And so I think magical is the word that I think of a lot when I think of what it is like to be a part of this community. If we're leaning towards the joyful side, that is something that I really, really love.
Who wants to go next? JD.
Everyone. So mine is, I guess, not as magical as Ben's. Mine is more of, well, I identify as non-binary, and to me, a long time I felt like I was a plant or a flower in this pot that just restricted me and was always, you can't do this, you can't do that, based on who we look to you as a person and see you as. And being non-binary is like breaking that clay pot and just like growing however I want and really thriving outside of this construct of what is a social construct, really. So to me, it's just, I've just begun my journey of like exploring how grand I can get as a plant or a flower.
Beautiful. Celia.
Thank you, Mark. Growing up in India and as a person, as an immigrant to this country, I've always carried the shame as a child because being trans is a 7,000-year-old culture. It's always been there. But due to the colonial restrictions that came into India, people like me were not given a voice. We were not given visibility. And I was one of those children who didn't want to come out when I saw a lot of the folks like myself were being marginalized and beaten. And to me, my voice and visibility as an Asian trans person in this country matters a lot, not just across US, but across the world. Our stories are powerful. Our voice, our visibility is very powerful. And that's what I want to share. And that's my identity. Though I identify as a gender non-binary and trans femme, my identity is to be a good human being, is to be a good parent, is to be a good husband or wife to my wife. I'm a person with neurodivergent issues, but I am as creative and I'm as innovative and I'm as successful as anyone else across the world. And these stories, like what you see today, people like all of you, our stories need to be told. And that is what is important to me. And that's so important to all of us as trans, non-binary, or gender non-conforming community. Thank you.
Yeah. Peppermint.
Wow. Well, to sum it up, a bit of what everyone said, I think I would obviously certainly agree with. And as Celia's talking about humanity, it reminds me of a quote that I won't quote because I can't remember exactly what the quote is, but Dr. Angela Davis basically stating that trans and non-binary people are pointing the way to so many types of freedoms when it comes to living outside of the gender binary, living in a certain freedom and truth that we eventually work our way towards. And I'm completely paraphrasing, but she said pretty much that idea. And Ben mentioned feeling magical, and it does feel like a superpower maybe not just for the notion of being queer or trans or non-binary, but certainly in a more practical sense, being free from a lot of the social constructs that JD mentioned, you know, and free of a lot of the heaviness and fear and constraints that we as individuals experience just socially because of our sexuality, not because of our sexuality, but because of the limitations that society puts on us through our sexuality, through our gender expression, and how we perform gender. And so when we break those rules, we experience a lot of pushback and we pay a certain price, but with that price can come a certain freedom and certainly a power that I enjoy and I ain't never giving back.
Love that. I won't be answering every question, but I think it's important to frame my role as a moderator in this question. And so I identify as a queer Latinx disabled femme, gender non-conforming. And so I think that for a lot of people, they see gender non-conformity as an in-between space, a momentary state of being that leads you to fully become one or the other, right? And for me, I am not in the in-between. I am not in transition to become something or someone else. I am who I am. And so I think that there is power in recognizing that we are who we say we are, and that people who are naysayers or haters will try to convince us otherwise. I often say that authenticity is our superpower. It is my superpower. It started with me being real with myself so I can be real with others, right? And so that's a long time journey. And so that's how I come into this conversation, but I'm going to be, again, moderating this more and less engaging in the discussion part. So super excited to have all of you here. Thank you once again. I'm going to turn to the next question, and just to give you all some time to think quickly, I'm going to go to Celia first, and then Peppermint, and then go to my other colleagues at Hummingbird. Okay, that's going to be the order for this next question. Given the current situation in our country, with some states creating legislation to restrict trans kids from receiving gender-affirming care, or teachers from saying gay, what impact do you expect the current climate will have on queer and trans people moving forward?
This is a very emotional question for me, because as a child, I remember not able to come out because my parents didn't understand me. We grew up in an evangelical Christian home back in India. My dad was the first Hindu convert to a Christianity. And to me, for the love of God, I didn't understand why people like us are being marginalized, ostracized by the society. And I grew up in India in that kind of a climate where I couldn't speak up. My mom was a nurse, and I thought she would understand. But it's all about, just keep quiet. You're just going through a phase. Don't talk about it. I started living in doubt and denial. And even when I was abused as a child, I carried that abuse in me, and I didn't have a voice. And I didn't know how to tell my parents that I was molested by my own uncle. And this is the kind of situation that we go through in our lives today. And I hope this is a trigger warning. I mean, for a lot of you who have, like Mark explained, we have gone through these challenges in our lives, not just in this country, but even for a person. When I grew up in India and I came here, I saw the same things happening to the children over here. Parents are willing to accept, they're willing to educate themselves and also to educate the community and the school board to speak up for the children. But unfortunately, there's been a lot of issues here. And I see that building allyship and constantly fighting this battle is important. I've been in this country for almost like for 25 years now. I've seen different governments come and go. And there's suddenly, the Democrats come, we all celebrate, we have so much of joy, and then it goes away. And then we feel so marginalized. It's always a constant battle with different governments. But we need to keep our eyes on the ball and start working towards educating our community, our doctors, our nurses, our school board, our politicians, every person that we come across, and also start building allyship in every area so that we can educate others. Our stories need to be told in the school board. All of us over here, Ben, Peppermint, JD, Mark, our stories need to be told at every schools, at every universities, at every workplace, so that they know that we carry these traumas and we want to be in a psychological safe environment, even in our workplace. And we need an environment that can really foster for us to thrive and succeed. And though we have come with a lot of challenges in our lives in so many ways, we should be able to speak up and be our own selves and be our authentic selves and work. And I see that this is a constant battle. Today it'll be don't say gay, tomorrow it could be don't say trans, don't say gender dysphoria. It was right there during the last administration. They were about to take the word gender dysphoria out of CDC. And this is a constant battle because they want to erase the science behind why we are struggling with what we are doing today. And now we are coming out and speaking up. It's not because of Caitlyn Jenner. It's not because of these people. It's because of who we are. We are our own visible people. And I think our stories need to be heard. And that is most important. And we need to constantly advocate for ourselves. And though it's exhausting, but we need to do it. And that's what I believe in.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing. And thank you for being so vulnerable. Peppermint, I'm going to pass it over to you.
Wow. I think the impact, certainly the message that is being sent to many people in the queer community, particularly the youth that are, the target of most of these legislative attacks. The message that's being sent is that we are less than or second class citizens, are not wanted in school sports or in schools or in the bathrooms or in any of the places that they're trying, having healthcare. And obviously that's a terrible message, but I do think that, I was reminded of our brilliance as a community after reading A Transgender History by Susan Stryker, where she says, here's another quote that I don't remember the whole quote, that, queer people, folks that are a part of marginalized communities, we generally are more politically active and are willing to fight for what we need because we have less to lose. And so when our community, I hope that when people in our community, whether they're new to the community or have been around as for a long time, some of us, I hope that this will be, it will probably be shocking for people to discover what's happening, and especially if they begin to experience some of these discriminatory laws and policies firsthand. But then I hope that that will be empowering and energizing in the long run. I certainly do believe it. When I said we're not going to, I don't want to give back any of the power that I've tasted. I think that most of us probably feel that same way. And although we know that laws seem like they're collapsing around us, yes, thank you very much, Brian. These laws are seemingly collapsing around us. Laws can be changed. They can be written, they can be unwritten. And, unfortunately, we're witnessing our identities as sort of the fodder of how they're, playing this game. But I do believe that ultimately we will, it feels as though the progress that we've experienced so far and the direction of the progress that we've been going in, it feels as though that's our destiny. And so it's very difficult for me to believe that anything other than that would be the case.
Yeah, I'm gonna pass it over to Ben and then JD.
Yeah. I echo a lot of what Celia and Peppermint both shared. I think what really comes to mind for me when I think about these bills is amplifying the scientific theory called the gender minority stress theory and the minority stress theory, which essentially says that if you are a member of a marginalized group, knowing that there are people out there who have it out for you, verbally, physically, legally, in whatever form, both the actual and anticipated discrimination and harassment have a constant psychological and physical toll on your physical health. There is such an impact of that. And there was just a study that came out showing the impact on trans youth mental health of just hearing about these bills, even if they were not living in any state where they were happening. And so by talking so much about all of these awful bills and by having all these awful bills happening, because the answer isn't stop talking about them, but by having so much of this, it is feeding into that minority stress theory of just walking through the world knowing that there is a target on your back, and for people to really specifically and with their whole chest say there is a target on your back for no reason at all. One of the things that I think really strikes me in particular about a lot of these bills is that they are solving a problem that doesn't exist and getting people fired up against the trans community so that no one complains when they take away more and more of our rights and target trans adults and do anything that they want to. And the Utah governor, he's a Republican and he vetoed the trans sports bill. And he said there are 75,000 high school athletes in the state of Utah. 4 of them are trans, and 1 of them is participating in women's sports. Never has so much hate been directed towards so few. And that, I think about that every single day, that it is not a huge problem that people are trying to solve. It is, everything is just a cover to try to legislate us out of existence. And that is the message that is sent. And there is a really serious weight that that takes on all of us.
Thank you, Ben. I guess I have two points of view to share here. The first one being individual, and the second having worked as a teacher with LGBT youth. And the first is my personal experience growing up as a kid and seeing all of the hate that was out there towards me when I didn't even know who I was. I just knew that I didn't fit here, I didn't fit there, and that I wasn't allowed to talk about things. And that led me to be a really reserved teenager, really isolated. And as a teenager, I attempted suicide, which happens to youth when they really feel like they don't belong anywhere. So then when I became a teacher later on and I worked with LGBT youth, and I was able to provide programming highlighting queer voices, talking about Alan Turing and how he helped decode the code and help win the Second World War, or when Bayard Rustin helped the civil rights movement and the March on Washington, and then talking about all of the gender expressions in the world outside of what we know in our own backyard, and how many cultures have these genders beyond just man and woman and have existed for centuries. It's all of those things are taken away when you start restricting kids in education and what you're able to talk about, because that actual teaching, that those contributions of our own community is what saves those lives, because you see the value that you're bringing to the world and how long you've existed and deserve to be here. So it has a huge impact on trying to restrict these things, particularly on the youth.
Yeah, and again, thank you for your vulnerability and sharing that. The Trevor Project, the nation's leading LGBTQ youth mental health organization and crisis support line, said in the recent survey report that LGBTQ youth who received or belong to high supportive families and communities and schools were like drastically less likely to try to commit suicide than those who were not, right? And so when we talk about supporting LGBTQ people, young people and people in general, we're talking about life and death here. We're talking about, and it's not just like, oh, you don't belong here, go sit over there, right? We're not talking about a lack of belonging. We're talking about a lack of dignity, a lack of humanity, like I don't know about you all, but just today I received a hate comment on my Instagram that said people like us should be executed. And I was thinking to myself, I was like, and then we have people like Dave Chappelle and Ricky Garvis doing Netflix specials, making fun of trans people. And I say words matter, right? Words matter because words are always the first step in dehumanization, right? Before the fist is thrown, before the gun is shot, before the knife is pulled out, words are thrown at us to intimidate, to make us feel less than, to make us feel unsafe. It always starts with language, right? And so how do we constantly challenge our communities, our workplaces, our schools, our leadership to shift their understanding of language as it evolves and people's identities, right? And so words really matter. So thank you all for sharing that. I want, in the interest of time, I'm gonna propose that some of you answer the next question. It doesn't have to be all of you, but of course, if you have something to say you want to add, please feel free to do so. According to the National Center for Transgender Equality, more than 1 in 4 transgender people have lost a job due to bias, and more than 3/4 have experienced some form of workplace discrimination. Refusal to hire, privacy violations, and harassment, and even physical and sexual violence on the job are common occurrences and are experienced at even higher rates for transgender people of color. How have you navigated your own identity and overcome barriers in the workplace? I'm going to push over to Peppermint first. As someone who's in the entertainment industry, especially when there tends to be a lack of representation. I remember meeting Laverne Cox at a conference and her being on the cover of Time, calling it a tipping point. And we'll get to this a little bit later, but I feel like every time there's a tipping point, there's a huge backlash, right? And so that was the tipping point, and then it was the backlash. And now we're trying to move forward, and there's a backlash. Oh, and
I'm still here.
You're still here, okay.
No, I don't know why my camera's out, but don't worry. I'll bring it back in a second.
Okay, so I'm gonna go to Celia first then, while Peppermint handles that. So Celia, how do you navigate your own identities and also overcome the barriers in the workplace that you've experienced as a trans person?
Yeah, absolutely. I have been working in the corporate industry for more than 23 years, and a lot has been said or spoken by the companies where they talk about inclusion, diversity, equity. But I don't see that when it comes to the trans community, because when I worked for all these companies, I had so much of, I would say, a lot of experience in the industry. And I tried coming out as Celia and I wanted a job, and companies would hire trans folks, but at a junior level. They didn't want to hire trans people at a senior level. I was an executive senior director with some of the consulting firms. And when I wanted to join at the same level, they gave me a job as an admin coordinator or a job as someone who is a case manager. I have built case management businesses across the world for $30 million in India and across the world. And to me, I saw there's a lot of discrimination. The way in which I overcame that was speaking up. I didn't give up. For 1 year, I was jobless. I took my resume from company to company, went to all job fairs, and I said, I'm Celia, and this is my resume, and I want you to consider me for a position at the level and the experience that I bring to the table. If I have been Daniel, Accenture just gave me a job, not even an interview. I was called to Sacramento, and they said, here's your job, Daniel, take the job. We want you to come to our client site next week. But here's the difference. When I came out as Celia, Accenture, or any company that has been talking about it, they don't want to hire you at a senior level. They're okay putting you at a junior level. So after struggling for 1 year, I then applied for starting my own company. And I started my own consulting firm. And I went back to the clients who refused to give me a job as Celia. And I said, I can do your consulting. In fact, I was discriminated in a company twice. And that's the same company where they have called me to be an advisor for a $26 billion pharmaceutical company. And the chief of that company said, Celia, you bring so much of wealth of experience and we need you in our company. It comes by patience, but not losing hope, by slowly pushing the button and speaking the right kind of language. We cannot do it by making a lot of noise, but doing it with grace and doing it with intelligence, doing it accurately, what resonates with people, and speaking their language, and they will listen. But it takes time. My wife took 17 years to accept me. So I always remember that when companies have a hard time. And to me, that matters because if she took 17 years to accept me, companies take a lot more longer. But we don't have time, but we need to keep doing what we're doing.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. I also want to amplify, that unemployment rates for trans people, especially trans women of color, are drastically higher on average than that of our non-trans counterparts. And, you know, we live in a capitalist society. We cannot afford to be underpaid or, unemployed. And so I think that there's been a lot of talk about conformity, right? Like looking a certain way, toning it down, as folks would say, or speaking their language. And I think there was a place for code switching, but I also think that if we want to disrupt the status quo, then we need every approach and every angle to this, right? And so there's not just one way of doing it, there's a multi-prong approach. So I'm going to pass it over to Peppermint. I'm glad your video came back on. And I'm particularly interested in your experience in the entertainment industry, recognizing that GLAAD reported that, trans characters are still underrepresented, that LGBT characters,
Surprise.
right? And so how do we start, from your perspective, how do we start to manage this in the workplace?
Well, I mean, my first experience of discrimination in the workplace was in a bank, and I used to work in a bank before I moved to New York, and I was a model employee in more ways than one, and they did not like my hair weave, and they put me in the back, where I just was out of sight, like the freak in the back, where I would not come into contact with any of the employees because I was told I was making them uncomfortable. My presence was making them uncomfortable. And then I got fired. And this was in the 90s when it was legal to do such a thing. And, that really kind of cemented this sort of fear in me that that I needed to blend in and that I needed to play by their rules, which there is some validity to that. But I do believe, just as you kind of sort of hinted at, Mark, is that, if we were going to wait around for them to just give us something, like, honey, we turn into mummies sitting around waiting for these people to give us what we need and our rights and equality and all of this. And so we do need, there is something to be said for, respectability politics, but then by the same token, the squeaky wheel gets the oil. Is that the expression? We have to make noise so that they know that we're here, so that they understand the urgency. And I think moreover that they understand their part in what's happening. We're not like discriminating against ourselves, or we're not just like poor because we're born, to be poor or to be discriminated against. This is the byproduct of a system that everyone participates in, or everyone has, a connection to, whether they feel like they know someone who's trans or gay or gender nonconforming or not. And, there was a Pew poll that says, I think as many as 80, maybe even 90% of Americans, because I saw a couple of different results, say that they don't know someone personally who's transgender. And so that's a lot of people who don't know anyone who's transgender personally. And most of those people are voting people who pay taxes and are involved in making decisions about the school system and everything else that affects our lives. And so it is important for them to understand. Sorry for my rant. Okay, so the entertainment industry yeah, it has the same type of discrimination as any other industry, and tokenism is alive and well in all of these industries. You know, and I do remember a time when, you know, it sounded like some kind of a sick joke. A trans woman, a drag queen, and, you know, some gay boy walk into a room, and it's an audition, and we're all there for the same roles, um, because we were just brought in with zero distinction uh, between any of those identities and any of those types of folks. Uh, Not that there aren't some similarities and some through lines, obviously, but you know, we were all going in for dead hooker number 4, and that was it. And so I do think that the industry has begun to change a bit. Certainly, television more than film, and oddly enough, theater is way behind all of that. Live professional theater, at, like, you know, the Broadway level, is behind. It's just behind. And so it's a little bit discouraging, but we have seen a lot of progress, as Celia said. And I think one of the things that we can be grateful for is the effects of what happened in 2020. There were a lot of conversations and a lot of moments. We probably wouldn't be sitting on Zoom right now. You know, people were having these conversations. So many more people are willing to listen and to understand, again, their participation in the systems of oppression that are just, you know, so baked into our into our lives. And so I think that is one silver lining. Not that it was great to have lost anyone, you know, to violence or police brutality or anti-trans hate or any of these things, but now, and these things have obviously been happening since since the beginning of things have begun. But now I think people are starting to connect the dots a little bit more, and we're able to have, you know, agency. When I was on Broadway in 2018, you know, I really enjoyed my experience. It was so wonderful to be a part of the Broadway community, which is a family and a very queer-centric show that was great, called Head Over Heels. But, you know, I was doing a lot of work, but, you know, to enlighten and engage with and answer questions and educate not only people who worked there in my show, backstage, the producers, the creatives, but then also, you know, like people who were interviewing us. And it just seemed like this moment was a little bit before its time. And I was doing a lot of work. I brought somebody in from the ACLU to kind of educate folks on, you know, trans identities and non-binary identities and things like that. And that's not my job. You know, I'm not a DE&I consultant, but that's the work that I think a lot of queer people end up doing in their own personal spaces, at their own jobs, in their own families, because we are invested in this change that we need to see. But now I do think that more companies and corporations are realizing that it's important to do the work that we're seeing right here in this very room, including the entertainment industry.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing all that, Peppermint. I'm gonna, in the interest of time, I'm gonna move on to the next question. JD, Ben, I hope you don't mind. Feel free to put in the chat your thoughts on that particular question. But I want to shift really quick to be action oriented, right? And so how can, and I'm combining two questions into one question, so bear with me as I do this in real time. How can people managers and leaders of organizations cultivate a workplace that supports all people, including trans people, especially around things like redefining professionalism, creating workplace policies that are inclusive, around dress code, bathroom access, pronouns, etc., in a way that affirms and supports trans and non-binary people. So how can we kind of begin to do that? I'm going to pass it over to JD and then Ben and then Celia or Peppermint can chime in at that point. So let's go to JD first.
I would start by saying, first, don't assume, because to the last question about workplace environments and people, there's a lot of assumptions. There's a lot of, when I was in workplaces, it's assuming I was straight or then assuming I was a man. And it's, well, once you start assuming and other people are assuming around you, it's very hard to then come out and kind of disrupt all of that. It feels uncomfortable. So first, don't assume. And second, speak up. If these legislations are happening in places where you have a location, where your company does hold space in the community, you have a responsibility to that community and to your workers to talk when these things are happening. Because if leaders don't speak up, then I, as an employee, don't think they care. And if they don't care, then why do I care and invest more than I need to in a space? So it's, if you really want to reach those trans and gender non-conforming workers, start by taking action, by speaking up before you're being asked to speak up, before you're being asked to host one of these things, to talk about it. Ask, pose the question, start planning before it gets too late, when the fire has already started.
Absolutely, JD. And I think, to your point, it's about going beyond just rainbow logos for pride and being performative, right? It is about being proactive. It is about being prepared to respond in a way that is appropriate. And that doesn't just fall on the straight CEOs and white CEOs. That falls on every leader in organizations across identities, because I think that what tends to happen, right, is that we expect these companies that are led by hetero, cisgender, white people who are, again, most privileged and have most access to implement change in policies. And then the rest of us still kind of try to catch up to that model. And so it's about dismantling the entire system, right, of workplace cultures that are not human-centered, right? And so Hummingbird Humanity took flight, because it's a bird, took flight in 2020. That's a silly pun. And it's led by a white gay man, right? A white gay man who is doing work that is intentionally about inclusion and human-centered workplaces, right? And so he didn't ask me to do this, by the way. I'm doing this on my own free will. But I want to talk about how Brian has become an example in the DEI space in particular around amplifying his team members' voices. He does it through the blog, which I help him produce, right, and edit and put out in the world, where he encourages his team members to speak out in a public way if they disagree with something he's done, where we're able to challenge his perspectives and ideas around something, right? And more leaders need to follow that kind of example. We need to have more vulnerable, courageous, public conversation, because what's happening is a lot of people are trying to do the work behind closed doors, but they will always see other rainbow logos and no actual work being done. We need to make the work of inclusion public. We need to make the work of developing better workplaces so public and transparent that people know exactly what's going on. And so I want to pass on over to Ben and then Celia. So Ben, what can we do to address things like, I know a lot of us are remote now, but things around bathroom access and pronouns and inclusive policies and healthcare benefits and all those kind of things?
Yeah. What I'd say, which is similar to what JD had started to share, is start before you think you need it. I know so many people at companies who are HR leaders, CEOs say, well, we don't have to worry about policies or insurance or bathroom access because we don't have any trans employees. As soon as someone tells us they need it, we are so ready to hit go. And then 50% of LGBTQ plus workers in the US are in the closet, and they're waiting to know that those support systems exist. Because if I work in accounting, I don't want to write policies. I want to account. I don't know what the verb is, but not everyone wants to be responsible for building those support structures. They want to be able to exist and do their jobs, and it's not worth it to come out and have to do that for themselves. And so if you are in a position where you could be doing that and you're waiting, you already probably need it. And if you're thinking about boiling that down to a smaller situation, if you're just a person, you're in a group of people and someone makes a transphobic joke or comment or mentions that how much they loved Dave Chappelle's newest special, even if you think, well, there aren't any trans people in this room, there might be a closeted trans person in the room. There might be someone with a trans best friend, a trans partner, a trans family member. You never know who is there, who is watching to see what kind of statement you make, what jokes you laugh at. You don't have to make the joke. If you laugh at it, you're a part of it. How everyone is watching to see what you are going to do, what you are going to say, and who you're going to be. So to your point, Mark, make sure you're not doing it behind closed doors. I spoke at one company that had been covering top surgery under their insurance for 2 years, and they forgot to tell their employees. Their employees thought there was no gender affirming care and were spending years being really uncomfortable, assuming they did not have access to what they needed because they had done that work privately and didn't make a big deal out of it because they were like, oh, we don't want to make it a whole thing. And people didn't know about it. So make sure that it is public and that it is clear and is consistent with your values, and it is before you think you need it.
Absolutely. And I want to say, in the interest of time, we only have a few minutes, so I want to start to transition us to final thoughts. I want to say to Celia, as we go beyond marriage equality for LGBTQ rights, what does the movement need to consider and focus on moving forward, not just in regards to workplaces, but our communities? So what can we do as a movement to go beyond marriage equality now?
I think the biggest issue that we face today in the workplace or in our community is, hey, you chose this lifestyle, you chose this lifestyle, and so this is what you get. But always I keep telling them that this is not a lifestyle choice. Given a choice, I would not have chosen to be trans when people like me were getting kicked out of the train and kicked out of the buses and being called faggot in Pennsylvania. This is not a lifestyle choice. This is our life, period. And you need to understand when someone is trying to put a policy around how we should live, what we should speak, how we should look, that is wrong. Because you cannot tell another colleague in the workplace how to behave. The important thing is to be allies in the workplace. So like what Ben was talking about is so critical. I mean, it's critical that we cannot keep doing advocacy for ourselves. Sometimes we are exhausted. And this is where allyship comes in. And I want to quickly summarize this allyship in the abbreviation so that we remember this going forward. So allies is spelled as ALLIES. A is acknowledge your privilege. And this is for all of you who are on the call for and being very supportive to our community. Acknowledge your privilege that you can help us. Second thing is listen to our stories. Don't listen to the media that is portraying us in a wrong way. And listen to our stories, our personal stories. And then another L is to learn to unlearn what you have learned. There could be a lot of things, and you may want to unlearn certain things to be more accepting and more accommodating in the workplace. Then I is to instigate tough conversations and decisions in your company. This is very important. E is to educate yourselves and also to educate others. So it's so important for you to do that. And S is being supportive. Support by being involved. Don't just give money to our community. When you see an AIDS walk, when you see a Transgender Day of Remembrance, come and participate. Be there. Feel the atmosphere, feel the environment, and be there for our community. And this is so important. Lastly, the change needs to happen from the bathroom to boardroom and recruitment to retention. That's the way you want to measure your company, the success of your company. Don't just stop at a boardroom level, but have the representation of trans people even in your boardroom. I would love to see trans folks going to the moon. I would love to see trans folks, being in the utmost corners of the earth. And I've already saw a picture of one person holding a trans flag on Mount Everest. It was amazing. that's the way we can change. This is what we do. And thank you for giving the space.
Absolutely. And before we transition the recording from non-recording to the Q&A portion, I want to give everyone 30 seconds to give their final thoughts. So Celia, thank you for sharing yours. I'm going to go over Ben, then Peppermint, then JD, and then I will say final remarks, and then we'll do the Q&A. So I think I said Ben, right? Oh, bad memory. Ben, yes.
Yeah, so just kind of closing remarks. One big thing I would say that has not been said yet is there also is a lot of space and a really important need for allyship within the community. So someone like me, for example, I'm in a really interesting duality where I am a member of one of the most, oppressed communities. The transgender community gets a lot of hate, and I'm transitioning into being a white man, which is the most privileged community. And so I have access to spaces that other trans people don't. And so I acknowledge if I get invited to speak on a panel because, people assume that I have more expertise or whatever, stuff they're bringing with them, whatever layers of racism they have internalized that they are leaning towards inviting someone like me, I'm going to say, I see all white faces on this panel. Who else are we getting invited? And I have a whole network of people that I know that I say, here are 3 other speakers I'd love to invite in. And, if you need to split the budget and pay me less so you can afford to pay those speakers, great. There is so much of a need, and especially of cisgender people within the queer community. There is a large contingent of people leading a drop the T movement to say that, well, the LGB community would have more rights if we weren't trying to tack transgender people onto it. And there is so much of an opportunity for people like, like Mark said, Brian is a great example of, he is a cis white gay man. And I know plenty of cis white gay men who are quite anti-trans, and Brian is a staunch advocate for the trans community and uses the privilege and power that he has as someone with a lot of experience, a lot of really powerful connections to make a tangible difference. So people who are in both the queer community and in the trans community who have other elements and layers of privilege, make sure you acknowledge that and you use that. Right? When I first came out, I wasn't really thinking about that. And I was like, oh my gosh, I hear all these horrifying statistics. And now I realize that, yes, some of them do apply to me, right? I've lost job opportunities. I have been threatened. I have received hate mail like a lot of us have, but I'm less likely to get those because I am white. And so I have more of a duty to go into spaces where other trans people might not be safe to go into and try to make a difference in those spaces. So I want to make sure that that is heard. And to anyone who is here who is hurting, just know that so many of these bills are failing. There are so many people who are on our side. We are going to make it through this. This is not a situation where I think we are permanently moving backwards. I think there are a lot of people who are getting very scared about how much we are moving forward, and that momentum will continue, and we are going to be okay. And I know it can feel like a lot, but I am glad you're here, and I hope you continue to stay.
Yeah, so I'm going to pass it over to Peppermint. I believe that was the order I gave, and then JD, and then we're going to transition to the Q&A. No pun intended with the transition word. All right. Peppermint, you're on mute, honey.
I want to, I guess the one thing, in addition to all the things that I would like to echo, I would love folks outside of the queer community and within the queer community, sort of piggybacking or extrapolating on what Ben was talking about, to make space for the partners of trans people, specifically those who identify as hetero and male, who are into trans femmes, because those are the people who are frankly killing us. Our partners are murdering us. Our boyfriends, our lovers, our romantic partners, our intimate partners are the ones who are killing us because of the shame and stigma that they experience, that they would just rather kill someone who's trans than anyone else know that they're with someone like us. And I think there's a lot of assumptions that happen. Again, we talked about that earlier. And so making space within the queer community, for the partners of trans folks, and then obviously for the folks who are not within the community, making space for them as well, so that we don't stigmatize them. There's no sort of like homophobia or stigma or shame around someone who's dating a trans woman,
Yeah. Thank you for sharing. That's really important. Before we go to JD, I just want to add to that as a queer, femme, cisgender person, I date trans men. And it is something I don't see a lot of representation around. And so I also want to mention that there are queer and bi and gay trans men in the gay and queer and bi communities, and they too need to be whatever, I can't say the word today. But also thinking about the role that, because it is our birthright for love and belonging. The moment we are conceived, we are connected to another human being. This pandemic, this time we're living in a disconnection, that is not natural for us as a species. And so we need to remember that trans people deserve not just jobs and safety, but love and belonging.
Mm-hmm.
To recognize our full humanity, you must recognize that not only are we lovable, beautiful, fierce, intelligent, skillful, artistic, creative, innovative, bold, but that we are worthy of all those things. And so I'm gonna pass it over to JD. Yes,
I
Peppermint.
need to add one thing onto that. Not only are we worthy of those things, but you would be so lucky to be with a partner who has done as much self-reflection as somebody like I have. And
Yes,
so you are deserving of being loved and sharing love with someone who's in the queer community.
absolutely. And that's period. That's on period. JD.
Thank you, Peppermint, for saying that, because recently one of my friends said that to me and I needed to hear it from someone. It's so for all of you who heard that, you're definitely worth it and deserve a lot. Two things I would say. First, to the queer community, to the LGBTQ community, is know your history, know your freaking history, because the only reason we have any sort of rights, any sort of visibility, any sort of representation is queer people of color, particularly trans and gender non-conforming people of color. And so for all of the freedom that you have in our society, remember that it came from people who still don't have it in a lot of our country. That, yes, great, we have marriage equality, but that is not speaking to all of our community. That's just speaking to a part of our community. We need to get rid of all of the employment, housing, any type of discrimination that's still legal in order for us to really think we're liberated as a community. We're not. We're nowhere near liberated. And to the allies out there, also educate yourself, because you love our culture. You love queer culture. You love queer Black culture. You love saying, yes, queen, slay, on fleek, all of these things, they all come from Black queer culture. So just acknowledge that a lot of what you love to absorb from pop culture, from trends, is things that were made up and created by this community that you hate. So try to reconcile those two on how you use all of our culture, yet still want to discriminate against us.
And that sounds like a great note to transition the recorded portion of this event. For those of you who are watching the recording, thank you for watching. I'm sorry you weren't part of the live Q&A discussion, but be sure to join us next month, June 21st, for another installment of Humminbird Hour featuring Rose Perry. From all of us at Humminbird Humanity, thank you so much for being here, for being part of the work and the conversation to support, affirm, and amplify the voices of the unheard. Thank you.